of the Hourglass holiday palettes. You've probably watched a million reviews on these so far, but this isn't just any review. This is the super helpful, super honest, semi-spicy Sophia review. So if you guys want to hear all of my thoughts about these palettes, which one is the best, or if any of them are worth it, then keep watching. What's up, friends? Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are doing well. I finally got my hands on the Hourglass Holiday 2023 palettes, or should I say, I got the palettes the day that I was leaving for vacation, which is not great for putting up YouTube reviews, but it is great for fully testing out products for a review. So I've been testing out both of these palettes for over 2 weeks now, and I definitely have some thoughts. I have 2 of the palettes from the collection, but I am going to be sharing my thoughts on all 3, giving you guys a comprehensive recommendation here. I have number 1, the Jellyfish palette, which I got in the beautiful owl packaging. If you shop from the Hourglass website, you can customize the packaging, so don't let this distract you. I have the Jellyfish palette, and then I also have what is the darkest palette in the collection, which is the Snake palette, and I customized this with the beautiful Jaguar packaging because I'm a cat lady. So I needed to get the cat packaging. Now there's a lot of YouTube reviews of these palettes already. I'm sure you guys have watched a lot of them. I have not watched any of them because I didn't want to be biased in this review, but I want this review to be helpful for you guys. So I'm going to focus my review not only on the application and the best way to apply each of these palettes, but really like if they're worth it, honestly. If these are worth it, which one is best? Which one is going to be best for different skin tones? And then at the end of this video, I'm going to recommend to you guys the best Hourglass ambient lighting edit palette that I think that they are selling today. And guess what? It might not be one of the ones from this collection. So if you want to hear all of my hot takes and my analysis of these palettes, then keep watching, friends. Do not forget to give this video a thumbs up, please and thank you. And if you are new here, welcome to my channel. Consider subscribing because I upload new videos just like this one every single week. So if you love new makeup reviews, hit that subscribe button to join our fam. And as a reminder, friends, any of the makeup that is on my face today and also a shopping guide for where you can purchase these palettes, it's all going to be linked in that description box down below. I do use affiliate links, so shopping through my links does earn me a small commission, which I put towards running this channel. And also, guys, Hourglass did kindly give me a coupon code that you can use on their website for any of the products. So I'm going to list that down below as well. I'm not affiliated with Hourglass. I wasn't gifted any of these products, and this isn't sponsored, but they did kindly give me a coupon code. So I'm going to list that down below as well. All right, party people, let's dive in. There will be timestamps down below in case you want to skip ahead. I'm going to cover the Jellyfish palette in total, first all the swatches, applications, comparisons, and the pros and cons of this palette. Then I'll do the same for the Snake palette. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you guys my overall recommendations, as I mentioned. So that's the gist of it. Let's dive in first to the Jellyfish palette. Now, this one is noticeably the lighter of the 3 palettes. It comes with 2 finishing powders, 1 bronzer, 2 blushes, and 1 highlighter. There are 3 new shades in this palette, so half of the shades are new. So looking at the close-up, we have the Ambient lighting powder. This is in diffused light, a warm pale yellow existing shade. Ambient lighting blush. This is new, called Rose Fusion, which is a cool mauve. Then we have the Ambient metallic strobe lighting powder. This is also new in opal strobe light. That is a pale rose gold. Then on the bottom row there, we have the Ambient lighting bronzer. This is new, called Lunar Bronze, and that is a matte warm bronze. Don't worry, it's not too warm. We're going to talk about that soon. Then we have the Ambient lighting blush, which is called Diffused Heat, a vibrant poppy. That is existing. Then we have the Ambient lighting powder, Ethereal Light, which is a cool translucent. That is also existing. Let me show you guys the swatches here so you can see what this looks like in natural light. It's pretty light, especially the finishing powders, but we get a little bit of a pop from the blushes. I'll also show you guys here just a quick close-up of the beautiful owl packaging. Once again, this is the Jellyfish palette, but I did customize mine because I wanted this gorgeous owl packaging. You can only get this and you can only customize the palettes on the Hourglass website. I'm afraid of jellyfish. I'm like terrified of jellyfish in real life. So I skipped on the jellyfish packaging, and I'm just showing you guys the beautiful packaging here that you can get on the Hourglass website. So now that you guys know the details of the jellyfish palette, let's hop into the demo. Let's dive in, friends, and create a full face using the Jellyfish palette. So right here, I have the bronzer, the 2 finishing powders, the 2 blushes, and the highlighter. We are going to start off with the finishing powders. And I'm actually going to use the one that's slightly darker right here. You can see it's well loved. I like to mix it with the bronzer. This one is called Diffused Light. This one for me, I like to do more so kind of all over the face because it is the darker one. And then the lighter one, I usually use that one more so kind of just in places where I like to brighten up the complexion because it is very light. So we'll get to that in just a second. So it's very subtle right there, but you can definitely tell it kind of like mattified. The finishing powders as well are also great for just kind of like blending out blush and eyeshadow, buffing out colors that maybe are a bit pigmented and maybe you want to sort of diffuse them and make them look a little bit more natural on your skin. This palette, it's definitely it's lighter than the other ones that are in the collection. These powders are kind of good if you want to tone down the blushes for fair skin. So the lighter finishing powder, Ethereal Light, is this one that is right here. By the way, both of these finishing powders, they are the same ones that are in the Butterfly palette from last year. We're going to do some comparisons a little bit later. Usually with these lighter ones, like I was saying, I'll kind of use them just in places where I want to just add a bit more brightening. Like this powder is straight up white. So it's, I don't know, for me, it's not something that I like to use all over the face, but I do like it for kind of setting around the eyes like this, just to add a little bit more brightening where I have that darkness. Now we're going to bronze things up with the Lunar Bronze, and I did swatch it on my hand here so you guys can just see the tone on its own. It's a really nice, fair skin friendly bronzer, but I do think you could build this up a little bit if you had kind of like a medium skin tone. It's not too golden or orange, which is what I like. I know a lot of people they kind of complain if the bronzer ends up being a little bit too golden. See, it's pretty pigmented actually, so I'm gonna just buff it into the skin, and we'll do maybe like a half width, half without, so that you guys can see the difference. So here's a light application of the bronzer on this side of the face and then no bronzer on this side of the face. I think it's really beautiful. It's very subtle. Like I said, very fair skin friendly. So let's get that all over the face now that you have seen it. And then we're going to go in with the blushes. Now we're going to dip into the blushes, friends. So we've got Rose Fusion and Diffused Heat. I'm going to do one on each cheek just so that you can see the subtle differences. Let's go into Rose Fusion first. And I am going to be linking these buffer brushes, by the way, in the description box because these are perfect for like fitting into the pans and then really buffing the powders into the skin. I just feel like a good buffer brush is always handy for these palettes. So that right there is Rose Fusion, which is this one right here. It's very beautiful. I mean, we all have a lot of pink blush at this point in the year, but it is a really beautiful rose shade. Now I'm going to go into this one right here. So there's the difference between the two blushes. Honestly, when you put them on the face, I can't tell the difference that much. They both look like a rose blush. If you take a look at the swatches here on my hand, you can tell this one is darker and this one is a little lighter because it has just the lighter pigments that are in there. But as you can see, when they go on the face, they're really not that different. And lastly, of course, we have the highlighter, which is called Opal Strobe Light. That's this one right here. When I first saw the promo photos, I thought this was going to be a neutral blush and I got so excited, but it is a highlighter. But that being said, I do think that the highlighter is probably the most unique powder that is in this palette. Let me show you guys a swatch right here. Like, look at that. It's so beautiful. I also think that this is the perfect shade to put in a Jellyfish palette because aren't there like those jellyfish that are kind of like, I don't know, they glow or they're at like the depths of the ocean. They're kind of iridescent in a way. Like this kind of makes me think of, I don't know, a shimmering jellyfish. Does that make any sense? Anyway, I think it's a really beautiful highlighter. Let's put it on the face. I was looking for my brush, but I found it right here. So let's take a look at this in the natural light right there. Go in with a little brush like this if you really want it to pop, or you can go in with one of the buffer brushes and you can kind of diffuse that. You see the difference there? See how it really just kind of melted into the cheek? Yeah, I really, really like this shade, and we're gonna put this on the eyes in just a second. The face is done, friends, but let's do a quick eye look. I love to put these powders on my eyes. I love just like a good, quick, full face of a palette. So I'm gonna go in with the bronzer and apply that into the crease. I'm gonna use the finishing powder right here as like a little bit of a base for the lid because it's just like nice and neutral. I'm also applying some of the bronzer to the lower lash line. And then finally, I'm gonna go into that highlighter. And like I said, this is a beautiful eyeshadow shade. I mean, look at that, so pretty. You can also put a little bit here in the inner corner just to kind of brighten things up. I mean, the highlighter really makes this palette. That's my opinion. Ta-da! And this is the final look, friends, using the Jellyfish palette. Comment down below and let me know what you think of these powders. How do you think they performed on my face? Do you think the tones look good? What do you think of the blushes and the highlighters? Comment down below and let me know what you think. And now we're gonna get into some comparisons with the Jellyfish palette. I hope that demo was helpful for you, friends. Now what I'm gonna do is tell you guys the pros and the cons of this palette, and then I'm gonna do a couple of quick comparisons just so you can kind of get a sense for how, the bronzer compares to other bronzers and all that kind of stuff. So starting off with the pros, the first thing I wanna say, this might be a pro, this might be a con, is that this is definitely for fair skin tones. I've kind of mentioned this already in the video, but this is a very light palette, particularly the two finishing powders. But some things that I really like about this is that I really like the bronzer. I think it is very fair skin friendly. I think it can be built up if you are tanner than I am, if you're more of like that light to medium. I do think that you can make this work. The bronzer is described as warm, but I'm wearing it on my face today and I don't really think it's too warm. As I also mentioned in the demo, the highlighter is absolutely gorgeous. It's so stunning. I really think that it makes the palette. If you love highlighters, if you like really bright highlighters, I think you're going to like this. That might be a con for some people if you want something that's more subtle. What I've noticed that Hourglass is doing with some of these newer palettes is that they are including that strobe formula in the palettes as opposed to that super duper subtle formula that we saw in a lot of the ones that they released maybe like 3 years ago. Hopefully, if you've gotten any of those palettes, you know what I'm talking about. These that they're including lately are more punchy, which maybe those are more popular, so they kind of caught on. And then the blushes for this, they are not too extreme, kind of compared to some of the other palettes from Hourglass. I do think they're rather fair skin friendly, so you don't have to worry too much about going overboard, given that this is a fair skin palette. Now for the cons, first off, just for my personal preferences, I do think that these two finishing powders, they're just so light. I don't want them to be that light. I'm pretty fair, and I still prefer more of like the dim light powder from Hourglass, which is a little bit deeper and more neutral because I don't want to look like a ghost. Like I'm already going in with the bronzer. I really don't like this white powder right here. I feel like it was incredibly unnecessary to include both of them because they both are kind of similar. They're both very, very pale. I really just find myself reaching for this one right here. That one is the diffused light. And then ethereal light, as I mentioned, like I can use that for brightening up the under eyes, but it really is not that necessary. I almost wish that they had included kind of just one big pan for the finishing powders like they've done in the past, or maybe just include like a different blush, maybe one that isn't rose, which kind of brings me to my other con in this palette, which Hourglass tends to do a lot, is that these blushes, they don't look all that different. Like we're getting a lot of pink blushes throughout this entire holiday collection, and I just am not super happy that even though these look different, they really don't appear all that different on the cheeks. I really wish that they had included a neutral blush in this collection, maybe something that was more like a beige or kind of like a beigey peach. I mean, who doesn't like that? Everybody likes a nice neutral blush, so I kind of wish that this powder right here, I wish that that was a neutral blush. And then finally, friends, I do want to do just a couple of quick comparisons to sort of demonstrate what I'm talking about the tones and colors that are in this palette. And I think this will be helpful because a lot of you guys, you have products like this already and you want to know if you need to pick this up. So right here I have one of my favorite Hourglass palettes. I really like these little trios of the finishing powders that they do. This is the one for lightest skin tones. They also have another one for medium and also deep. And I just wanted to show you guys like the difference in tones between this one that I like to use and the powders that are in the Jellyfish palette. Like this one is much more neutral and kind of flesh toned and works better for me. And that's just personal preference. I much prefer to use these. This one is Dim Light, my favorite one, as opposed to the ones that are in the Jellyfish palette. I also want to show you guys a quick daylight side-by-side of the Jellyfish palette and the Butterfly palette from last year. Now, the finishing powders in both of these palettes, they're exactly the same. So if you were wondering, those are exactly the same. I didn't really like the Butterfly palette all that much. You can tell I haven't really used this one over the past year because once again, the blushes are very similar and those finishing powders were just a little bit too light for me. So that's a quick takeaway for you guys. I will also show you a quick side-by-side of the Jellyfish palette and the Elephant palette from last year. You'll notice that the Elephant palette, it is noticeably deeper, not too much. The blushes are kind of similar. I think one of the biggest differences between these palettes is the bronzer. A lot of you told me that you don't like the bronzer that's in the Elephant palette because it's very warm, it's very golden, and I have to agree, it's not my favorite. And so right here, I'll show you, this is the Jellyfish palette bronzer, and this is the Elephant palette. So I really think that this one, it's a much better option. So if you kind of wanted similar tones like the rosy blushes, but you wanted a more appropriate bronzer that's kind of neutral, then I think the Jellyfish palette is a good option. Finally, I'm going to show you guys a side-by-side of the bronzer in this palette with the Tom Ford Terra bronzer. I like to use this bronzer as a good kind of like baseline because it's very neutral. So right here you have the Jellyfish bronzer and here you have Tom Ford Terra. Tom Ford Terra is a little bit more neutral, but I just want to drive home like this isn't an orange bronzer. I do think it's going to work for a lot of skin tones. And that's just like a really nice little baseline for you guys to reference. So now that we have that out of the way, let's dive into the Snake palette. Next up, we have the Snake palette. Now, just by looking at the website, it does look like this palette is supposed to be the darkest of the three or the deepest of the three holiday palettes. They do show a deeper skinned model in the promo photos. So I'm going to kind of comment on that in a little bit, guys, but this is supposedly the deepest palette. Now in this palette, we have one finishing powder, one bronzer. We have 3 blushes in this palette, and we have 1 highlighter. And what's really great about this palette is that 5 out of the 6 shades are new. And that's why I think a lot of people were interested in this one. That's also the reason why I picked this one up, just to see what do you got, Hourglass? These are supposed to be new shades. The only shade that is not new is the finishing powder. So from left to right in the first row, we have the Ambient Lighting Powder Radiant Light, a golden beige. That is the existing shade. Then we have the Ambient Lighting Blush Coral Haze, a pink coral. Then we have the Ambient Metallic Strobe Lighting Powder in Infinite Strobe Light, a warm gold. Then we have another Ambient Lighting Blush in Sunbeam, which is a rich peach. We have the Ambient Strobe Lighting Blush, which is called Mystic Flush, a mid-tone pink coral. And then we have the Ambient Lighting Bronzer, which is in Solar Bronze, and this is called a rich bronze. And then you guys can see the swatches right here in Natural Light. Of course, they're a lot deeper than the Jellyfish palette, and you do get very much kind of like a corally, beachy type of vibe from the tones that are in this palette. That's kind of the vibe of this. Is very corally, very beachy, kind of feels very summertime to me. So now that we have that out of the way, friends, let's hop into the demo with the Snake palette. Let's do a full face now using the Hourglass Snake palette. I do want to show you guys a quick comparison of the Hourglass finishing powder that I tend to use the most, which is Dim Light. This is in a lot of their other palettes. Just want to show you a quick side-by-side of Dim Light versus the one that is in the Snake palette. Notice how the Snake palette, just in general, It is a lot warmer, it's more coral leaning, and the finishing powder does have more of a golden undertone to it. So I'm going to use my little buffer brush and I'm going to apply the one from the Snake palette to my face. And I feel like it kind of warms up my skin a little bit, but honestly, I don't think it looks that much different than when I use dim light. I feel like this particular finishing powder, it's not going to work for deeper skin tones, but I do think that it will work for fair skin tones. And for those of you out there who are more like light to medium as well, I feel like a lot of these finishing powders, they can really kind of stretch across skin tones to an extent. And if you have a golden undertone, this palette might be the best one for you. You guys will kind of see it gives me this sort of like golden warmth radiance compared to maybe what you might see right here on my chest. Next, we're gonna go in with a bronzer, which is called Solar Light. And I wanna show you guys, I was thinking that this bronzer might be a little bit too warm, but it actually isn't that warm. And I'll show you a quick comparison right here. So this is the swatch from the Snake palette, Solar Bronze. This is the bronzer from the Elephant palette last year, which quite a lot of you guys told me you really didn't like because you thought it was too warm. And indeed it is. It is much more golden than the one from this Snake palette. And then what I have right here is the finishing powder from the Tiger palette from last year. So if you have a deeper skin tone, you might be able to use this bronzer, Solar Bronze, as a finishing powder if you like, because it's very similar to that finishing powder in the Tiger palette. So just letting you guys know if that makes a difference. Maybe you have the Tiger palette and you're like, I already have something that's very close, so I don't need this. But we're going to go into this right now. I'm going to show you guys how this kind of blends into my skin tone. I feel like it works pretty well. Comment down below and you guys let me know what you think. I think this can work for a lot of medium skin tones as well, except, you know, it might just be a little bit more on the natural side for you. You can always go more heavy-handed or lighter-handed. I'm using a wispier brush so that it really kind of seamlessly blends around the edges. But if you wanted to really pack this on, you could use something, you know, like this that's denser, a big buffer brush, and that'll really pack on the color for you. So here is the bronzer, friends. Comment down below and let me know what you think. I feel like it melts into my skin very well, as I mentioned before, and I'll just get kind of close so you can see the tone of that. Just like all the other Hourglass powders, it definitely gives a beautiful blurring effect. Now let's get into the blushes in this palette. Now all of the blushes, they're very kind of like pinky to coral leaning. So if you don't like pinky to coral leaning blushes, this palette is definitely not going to be for you. These are 3 new blushes, but they all have kind of very similar tones. As you can see, the 2 blushes that are in the middle of the palette, they are very similar. And then this one right here is more like a glowy blush, similar to what you saw in the Tiger palette last year. I will do some comparisons later in the video, don't worry guys. But yeah, these 2 blushes are pretty similar. And then this one is going to be more like a blush highlight. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to apply the center 2 blushes to each cheek so you can see the very subtle difference. And then we're going to use this shade to kind of buff on top so you can sort of see how you can mix and match the blushes. So I'm going to go into this one first. This one is called Coral Haze. And I'm just going to very lightly dust that onto the cheek. They're pretty pigmented. Like some of the Hourglass powders are very subtle. I wouldn't say that these blushes are subtle at all. So that is Coral Haze. I really love the radiance that this one gives. It's absolutely beautiful. But let me show you the other one, which is called Mystic Flush. This one right here. I usually just kind of mix these blushes. See? They're very similar. Very similar. I don't know why Hourglass keeps doing this, but they are quite similar indeed. I might not even need to mix them at the end to even things out because they look so similar. Even when you see them here on my hand, it's like, okay, this one's a tad bit darker. So there you go, friends. Those are the 2 blushes. Now I'm going to go into this glowy one right here. So this one right here is called Sunbeam, and it is very glowy and it is very pigmented. The way that I've been applying this is with a fan brush. I feel like this is the best way to get kind of like a more subtle look from this, because if you are fair like me, this is going to get so pigmented so quickly. If you have a deeper skin tone, I think going in with one of these buffer brushes and really buffing it into the skin is a good way to go. So I'm just going to dust this on lightly onto my little fan brush. I'll show you how I like to kind of melt that into the cheeks. And then if you feel like you still put too much on or you need to blend it more, going in with the little buffer brush definitely really helps to kind of melt everything together. So that's what that looks like. It just kind of took everything up a notch, made it a little bit more glowy and also a little bit more of like an orangey coral as opposed to these more pinky leaning corals that you see right here in the center of the palette. Finally, friends, we're going to go into the highlight. This one is called Infinite Strobe Light, and I want to show you here on my finger like just how bright that is. I'll do a quick little swatch. It also is pretty golden, but I think this is just light enough that I can make it work for my skin tone. I'm going to be using a smaller brush right now because I really want to show you the color before it's blended out. So see how that is much more golden? I definitely need to blend it out, but I just want to show you the color. I feel like this works for me, but if you have a cooler skin tone, this might be a little bit too golden. So now I'm going to blend that in. And this definitely adds more of like a pop to the cheekbone. So there you have it, friends. That is Infinite Strobe Light. Let's finish things up, friends, by adding these shades to my eyes as well. I'm first going to go into the bronzer. And I'm just going to pop that into the crease with a fluffy brush. Next, I'm going to go into the Sunbeam shade. That was that shimmery blush. And I'm going to use that as an all-over lid shade. This is beautiful as an eyeshadow, just like a really nice kind of warm coral to just warm up the face. I'm going back into the bronzer shade and I'm just adding a little bit more dimension and kind of melting those two shades together. I'm also taking the bronzer shade and I am applying a little bit to the lower lash line as well. Now I'm going into the highlighter and I'm going to use this to do exactly that. Just kind of like highlight the center of the eye so it's not so coral. And I'm also putting that shade in the inner corner as well. I love this shade for the inner corner. And then as I do with most of my eyeshadow looks, I like to go into the finishing powder and I like to just kind of blend around the look so it looks a little bit softer, more blended, more professional. And this is the final look using the Snake palette. Comment down below and let me know what you think. How do you think this works for my skin tone? Is it too dark? Is it too golden? Leave me all of your thoughts in the comment section. I feel like it works for my skin tone if I use the techniques that I showed you in the application. So leave me all your comments down below and let's move on with the rest of this review. I hope that demo was helpful, friends. Now, just like I did with the Jellyfish palette, I'm going to tell you guys what I personally think are the pros and cons of the Snake palette. First off, like I said during the demo, I do really like the finishing powder in this one. It looks like it might be a little bit too dark for me. I think it'll work well for medium skin tones, but personally, as a fair skinned person, I like kind of that beautiful golden sheen that it gives. So I do really like that. I also like just kind of like the beachy feel of this palette. I enjoy warm tones, so this really is my type of vibe. I really like the fact that they included a glowy blush in here to give us a little bit of differentiation. They did that with the Tiger palette last year, so I think that is a pro. I also really like, at least personally for my skin tone, the bronzer. I think it's not too warm. It doesn't feel too deep for me. It seems to work just as well as the one in the Jellyfish palette. That one is a little bit lighter, but I really don't feel like this is too intense for me. So in general, I do really like using this palette and I feel like there are several pros here, but there are several cons, okay? And I told you this was going to be semi-spicy. I have some hot takes here that I want to share. First off, and this isn't really a con, this is just depending on your skin tone, you know, if you are very fair, think about if this is maybe a little bit too dark, or if you don't really like warm tones, this isn't going to be for you. A lot of you guys picked up the Tiger palette last year because you enjoyed my review, but then you're like, yeah, this is a beautiful palette, but I just don't like reach for those colors, or you just kept reaching for lighter palettes. So be honest with yourself there on whether or not these tones work for your undertone or your skin tone. But as we kind of think about more like true cons, once again, why are the two blushes in the center like exactly the same? I just don't get that. Like, give us a nice toasty brown or a terracotta or something in here, Hourglass. That really annoys me. So to me, that is definitely a con. It's like you have two blushes that are exactly the same in the glowy version of it. So it's just very, very annoying. And then the last con that I have here, and you guys are going to have to give me your feedback on this. And, you know, if you have a deeper skin tone than me, let me know if this palette works for you, because to me, it seems like they are marketing this as the palette for deeper skin folks. If you take a look at the promo photos for each of the palettes on the Hourglass website, you have a fair skin model for the Jellyfish palette, and then you have both a fair skin and medium skin tone model for the Leopard palette, and then you have this beautiful deeper skin model for the Snake palette. I just feel like the powders in here, some of them would say otherwise for it being for deeper skin folks, because I just don't understand how this finishing powder is for a deeper skin person. If you take a look at the trio that they launched, which obviously I don't have, but I'll show you a photo right here, that works for deeper skin people. I've seen reviews of other creators using this and they say that it's really nice, but I don't see how this one works. Certainly you could use it kind of as a highlighter, but it just kind of feels like we took a step backwards here, friends, because we've been asking Hourglass to be a little bit more inclusive with some of the powders. And I felt like we got that with that trio. I felt like we got that with the Tiger palette. Like we were sort of taking steps forward. And this almost seems like a little bit of a step back. So I'm going to have to, you know, ask you if you have a deeper skin tone, if you feel like this worked for you. I feel like this is the palette for more medium toned folks. This is the same color, a very similar color to the finishing powder that was in the Tiger palette last year. So this can be used either as a bronzer or a finishing powder. So, you know, different people can use it for different things, but I don't know, guys. Like, I just don't feel so great about it. I don't know. You're going to have to let me know what you think. I think it's a con. Not trying to throw a lot of shade here. It's just like, if that's how you market it and then this is what it is, it's just like, I don't feel great about it. All right. And then as promised, I'm going to show you guys some comparisons. First off, I'll just show you a simple side-by-side of this palette with the Jellyfish palette. I really don't think that these palettes are similar at all. That's kind of one of the reasons why I bought both of these, because they just seemed so different. So I'm not really going to dive into swatches, although you know what? I will do a swatch comparison of the bronzers, because I feel like the bronzer is really where a lot of people get picky. So right here we have the Jellyfish palette bronzer, and here we have the one from the Snake palette. So they definitely have different tones, but you know, maybe you prefer one over the other. And then just like I did with the Jellyfish palette, here's the comparison of the Snake palette bronzer up against Tom Ford Terra. It is darker than Tom Ford, but they're both kind of a little bit more on the neutral end. Maybe even the Snake palette, it's a bit warmer. And then here's a side-by-side, friends, of the Snake palette up against the Tiger palette from last year. The Tiger palette in general, it just doesn't look as coral. Like, it's more neutral. It has a nice neutral blush, which we really didn't get from any of the palettes this season, which is why I really like the Tiger palette. I think I like the Tiger palette more, but I do like the fact that the Snake palette has the finishing powder. That's the only thing I don't like about the Tiger palette. I have to carry around a single of a finishing powder to be able to kind of like blend out the rest of the shades and the look and all that kind of stuff. So here are the two similar blushes from the Tiger palette, and then these are the Snake palette. They're similar, but I would say the Snake palette is just got more of this like pinky coral, whereas you get kind of more like oranges from the Tiger palette. And I didn't even swatch the nude one that's in here because it's just not similar at all. Let's do the highlighters real quick so you can see the difference there. We have Tiger palette, Snake palette. They're pretty similar. Maybe a slight difference. So if you already have the Tiger palette, guys, you're really not missing out on this one. I just don't really think that you need it. I prefer the Tiger palette. And then finally, because I know people will ask, here's a comparison with the Elephant palette from last year. It's a little bit more subtle. You guys can see it's also more pink as opposed to coral, and you get those lighter finishing powders. But the bronzer here in the Elephant palette, I just don't like all that much. And I'll show you guys here the swatches as well. These are the blushes from the Elephant palette, and these are the ones from the Snake palette. So see how these are just kind of deeper, kind of like more summery, more warm, less pink. All right, friends, are you still with me? You've made it to the end of the video. I hope all of this has been helpful so far, but as promised, I am going to give you guys just kind of like a summary, a rundown of which palette I think is the best to get. I'm also going to comment on the Jaguar palette, the one that I didn't get, that has mostly existing shades that I'm already familiar with. So I can give you guys my thoughts on that. You know, there's pros and cons with each of these palettes. I really enjoyed using both of them. I will say that. I love Hourglass powders. So don't take this as me bashing the palettes. I enjoyed using both of them. I took them on vacation. I used the Jellyfish palette for the most part when I was in Paris for nice, soft, classic looks. And then I used the Snake palette when I was traveling in Croatia for just kind of like beautiful coral, slightly tanner, beachy look. And I absolutely loved them. In terms of the Jaguar palette, I want to show you guys an image of this palette right here. I actually think that this is probably the best one to get, okay? Hear me out here. I didn't get this palette because it had a lot of existing shades and because it kind of looks similar to other ones that they've launched in the past. But that being said, I highly recommend you consider this palette, and for the reason of this has a lot of nice differentiation between the shades. I know it's not going to work for everybody, but for me personally, if I didn't have any Hourglass palettes already, this would probably be the one that I would get. And not just because it has the cute Jaguar packaging, but you can see right here from the image, it has dim light, which is my favorite finishing powder. It has a beautiful neutral gold highlighter. It has 3 blushes, all of which look pretty different. Mood Exposure is a really beautiful shade. It looks a little bit neutral, and especially if you kind of mix it with a bronzer, it looks even more neutral, goes with a lot of looks. I don't like the fact that there's 2 rose blushes once again, but this one does give you like a good mix of shades, and the bronzer looks pretty good as well. So this one actually, I would pay attention to this one. And I think a lot of people, they didn't want to get it because it was existing shades. But just remember, friends, it doesn't matter if they're existing or not. What matters is that, are you going to reach for the palette at the end of the day? Don't get pressured or get FOMO because you're like, oh, well, it's new and it's limited edition or whatever. Like, if you're looking at these palettes and you're like, oh, I don't think that all of the shades are going to work for me, then don't get it. There's other like singles and trios and other things on the Hourglass site that I really like. I love the trios. I love the singles. Maybe you just get one of those. You actually don't get that much of like a value by buying these palettes from a like product amount standpoint. Like, you don't get more product for your money. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of this video. They're each $90. The benefit of getting these is to have an all-in-one curation, a collection of colors. And if you're not going to use most of them, then you shouldn't get it. And so it really doesn't matter if they're existing or not. Like, get the one that you think you're going to reach for and you're going to use up. Now, despite all of that, friends, I actually have another recommendation for you. If the Jaguar palette doesn't look like it's going to be great, or if any of these, there's something wrong with all of these, I want to introduce you to the Sculpture palette. I actually think that this one is the best ambient lighting edit unlock palette that they have on their site. They released this, I think it was 2 holidays ago. 2 holidays ago? I think it was 2 holidays ago. And for whatever reason, guys, it's still on the site. This is the one that I reach for the most. And I'll show you right here. It's very well loved. I don't know if you can tell, but I've dug into the bronzer quite a bit. And I really like this one for the same reasons that I'm recommending the Jaguar palette to you guys, because you get 2 really nice finishing powders that are 2 different shades that are not like super white or super golden or whatever. You get 2 beautiful blushes, including Mood Exposure, the one that's in the Jaguar palette. They're differentiated enough. You get a beautiful bronzer, and then you get a really nice neutral highlight. For me, this is the one that's just kind of like all around, okay, I'm going to take this one on vacation with me because I know I have everything that I need type of palette. It's a little bit cheaper. I think that this one is $80. It's $85. So it's $5 cheaper, and you guys can use my coupon code if you want to save a little bit of money. So actually, despite all of this, guys, I still recommend this one, and it's not even a part of the holiday collection. I don't know how much longer it's going to be around, but it's still on the Hourglass website. So that's all I got for you, friends. I hope that you enjoyed this review. Hopefully it wasn't too long and you guys found that this was helpful. If you found it helpful, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that, and subscribe if you haven't already. And now it is your turn, friends. Sound off in the comments down below and let me know, what do you think of these palettes? Did you pick any of them up? Are they working out for you? Do you regret them? What is your favorite Hourglass palette? Leave me all of your thoughts in the comments section. And with that, friends, I hope that you see some beauty in your day, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.